So now you've thought about content, how to teach. The next step is figuring out what to teach. And you're experts on this. You're experts on content. You know what to teach. But I suggest that kind of every once in a while you review, make sure that what you're teaching is current, is up to date, is meaningful, it's what employers want. So I suggest periodically in your course design that you do what I call a content analysis. You ask yourself a number of these questions. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail. What do students need to know? What's current? What's up to date? What's cutting edge? What's bleeding edge information? And then how well do I organize it? How much time do I spend on each topic? What do students know at the beginning of the class that I need to develop? These are questions that you need to kind of review and think about. The next step in the process is figuring out who your students are. And folks mentioned this early on when I said when you're planning a course, what do you need to know? You need to know who your students are, what abilities, skills, experiences, interests they bring to the class. Right? Students. Why are students taking this class? What are their past experiences? How can you find this information out? Yes, sir.
Doing that on the points at the start of the
Okay, like a pre-test, a pre-quiz at the beginning of the semester. Excellent! I think that's one of the best suggestions I could give you. If you want to know how much your students know about what you're going to teach before you teach them, give them some kind of an assessment activity. Maybe, now this sounds crazy probably, along with all the other crazy things that I have to say, maybe you give a version of the final exam the first day of the first week of class. Maybe it's last semester, it's the same topics, but maybe a little different questions. And you give it to them and you say, don't get excited, don't get worried, this doesn't count. I'm using this to learn about what you're bringing to the class so I can adjust the content to make it relevant to you. I don't want to teach stuff you already know. I want to teach stuff that you need, that you don't know. So you get that exam, you grade it, and you find out that the average score on the entering final exam is a 40. And you have to think, is that okay? Do they know too much? Do they know too little? I don't know. If the pre-test is a 70, that might tell you you need to make the class a little harder. They already know a lot. If it's a 10, maybe you're designing the class too hard for them. So I don't know what the magic entering number is, but at least it provides you some information as to how then to design the content. Now, here's another reason to do a pre-test. How is your teaching performance evaluated? You get evaluated every year or so?
By the students, online evaluation, and by peers also.
Okay, so you might get peer evaluation, peer review. Maybe your department chair comes in and observes. You get your end of the semester student evaluations. All of those are kind of observational, subjective. Student evaluations are critically important. They're very important. They should not be discounted or ignored. But they also shouldn't be the only piece of evidence for you. One other piece of evidence that you could use. Now, many of us are scientists here. Don't we want to see delta? We want to see change. We want to see entering behavior and exiting behavior. So you use your pretest as a measure, a baseline measure. Here's your entering behavior, the 40. Average score is a 40. At the end of the semester, the average score is a 70. You can kind of build the case saying they improved those 30 points as a result of being in my class. I added value. Here's evidence of learning. Instead of just depending on what students say, you now have some data that supports what students say. By itself, it doesn't stand alone. Psychometrically, it's hard to say. But at least you have something else to add to the conversation. Yes.
Actually, some of the college or some of the departments, we used to evaluate course outcome itself before the final exam. We just have course outcome, this one, this two. We give it to the student and say, did you learn this? Did you learn this? Did you learn this? So when he give it back to me, I know really what he learned. And the final exam will assess also this, if it is right or if it is true.
Okay, that's great. That's another way of getting more data. Again, it's still subjective, but it's better than not asking that question. Yeah.
What do you think of if you say if a single student had an A, then the course has been delivered out of 20?
No. I've never heard that before. That's an interesting concept. If one student gets an A, then I've succeeded.
Not succeeded, the course has been delivered.
Well, the course is delivered in any case. Even if all of the students get C's, it's delivered. We can get into a discussion of how much responsibility you have for student grades and how much responsibility they have for their grades. That's a topic for another workshop. What would happen in your department? What would happen in your department? You have 20 students in your class. Every one of the students gets an A. What would happen? Would your department chair be happy or not happy? Isn't that crazy? Because the implication is you've done a lousy job. You've taught too easy. Instead of the implication, you must have done a fantastic job and everyone learned everything they needed to do to get an A. We have this bias against success. Just think about that. If your class, you want a reputation for being a hard, challenging professor, not an easy professor who gives out A's. Instead of a really good professor who makes students earn A's. Yes, sir.
You just want to ask you about the normal care.
Yes.
The normal care about assessment. What do you think about it?
Oh, you can see we've dealt with this before. The normal curve, I know a lot about the normal curve from a historical perspective. I used to work at the University of Missouri, and a psychologist by the name of Dr. Max Meyer in 1909 published an article where this normal distribution of grading first was introduced. And it was introduced because he felt like grades were too subjective. So let's introduce some scientific rigor in how we determine grades. And if you know what was happening around 1909, 1910, 1911, 1912, what was happening in Europe? World War I. Well, Alfred Binet, Simon Wexler were developing instruments to help the Army determine who should be officer candidates and who should be cannon fodder. Who would be in the trenches and who. And they developed intelligence testing. This whole concept of intelligence testing was developed. And through their preliminary research, they hypothesized that intelligence should be normally distributed. That the majority of people would be of kind of average intelligence, small percentage of people really bright, and a small percentage of people really don't. That whole normal curve has dominated psychometric testing, intelligence testing over the years. So Max Meyer said, well, if that's true in the general population, it must be true in the university population. So let's distribute grades normally. Not a whole lot of empirical evidence that that was in fact the case, because students in a classroom are not necessarily normally distributed.
How come we achieve such a normal curve in practice?
Well, we can't. Normal distribution of grades is a competitive approach. If you are here, your place on this curve is only you're only there because of where someone else is on the curve, right? And if you're thinking of implementing what the research on human learning says, that learning should be collaborative and cooperative, that doesn't facilitate cooperation, students helping other students. Why should I help you? Because you're in competition with me for the grade. There's been another approach to grading called criterion reference grading, where you determine a criteria of success, 90%. If you accomplish these tasks at a 90% level of proficiency, you'll get an A. 80% B. I'm just suggesting numbers, it could be different numbers.
And your expectation will come through, your expectation of the score, of the outcome, of assessment will come through as you put.
What happens here, and I've done this, is your performance as an individual student is not dependent upon other people. You're not in competition. It's okay to help someone else learn it. As a matter of fact, to teach once is to learn twice. We learn more by teaching someone else than just trying to learn it ourselves. So by helping others, we're actually helping ourselves. And I can have all of my students maintain the criteria level for an A. That's happened to me. And so the next time I teach the class, I raise the A to a 95. I challenge students a little bit more. But then I have to explain to my department chair why all 20 students in my class got A's. Because he's expecting grades to be normally distributed. So I tell them, I set these criteria. Through years of practice, I know how much work it takes and how much they have to do to perform these. And in this case, they all attain that 90% level of success. They'll get A's. The next step in this process is to look inward. Who am I as a teacher? Who am I? How has my background, my preparation, my individual characteristics shaped me? Who have I been as a learner? And how has that shaped who I am as a teacher? So another part of course design is self-reflection. This is a part that very few of us do. There's one of my favorite books on higher education is this book called On Becoming a Critically Reflective Teacher. If you want to read a book that's kind of more philosophical about teaching, this is a great book to read. But he says one of the things that we need to do to become a better teacher is to understand ourselves, understand how we have learned, and to try to understand how students learn. One point that he makes is that we teach what we teach because we're good at it. We get it. We understand it. And sometimes the most basic elements, or some points are so basic to us that we have a hard time understanding why these why these students can't get it. So he says we need to occasionally, every year or 2 or 3, experience failure. Most of us here forget what failure feels like. We tend to avoid situations where we feel uncomfortable in. We tend to avoid situations that challenge us. You know, you go to a conference and the presenter is giving his research findings and they agree totally with yours. And you walk out and you say, that was fantastic. What a great presentation. You go to a next presentation and the researcher's presenting data that disagrees with you. And you say, oh, this guy's crazy. I didn't like that. What's wrong with him? We don't like to be challenged. We like to succeed. So Brookfield suggests, let's put ourselves at something that is difficult, that we risk failure, so we can feel what our students are feeling. We need to feel what it feels like not to get it. We need to feel what it feels like to struggle. We don't do that. We forget what that difficulty, that frustration, that sense of not understanding is like. I'll give you a personal experience and then we're almost to the end. I grew up in New York City. From my house, I could see the water. I could see the ocean. I didn't like water. It made me uncomfortable. Give me dirt. Give me a ball. Give me something to kick or to throw. That was great. My friends had boats and they did stuff on the water. So I had this kind of, not fear, but discomfort with water. I would go to the sea, go for a swim, and I'd feel it too. I'd feel something hit my leg, make me feel some fish would hit me or seaweed or something. Ugh. So a friend of mine who was a chemical engineer who was a scuba diver instructor. He was actually went up in the space shuttle twice, in Columbia twice. He said, come on, James, come on, guys. I'm gonna teach you how to become scuba divers. I said, you crazy. But then, all my buddies, peer pressure. Even at 40 years old, used to come to peer pressure. Okay, so I took this scuba diving class. First you go in the swimming pool, and then you go out and you swim in the ocean. And you dive in the ocean. You have this test where you take off your weight belt and you take your air tanks and you have to flip them off and put them back on, kind of safety thing. I look back on my life, this was the most difficult, challenging, frustrating thing I've ever done in my life. I've gotten all kinds of degrees, all kinds of awards, beautiful family, fantastic wife of 40 years. The most difficult thing I've ever done is that certification diving test and getting my PADI license. It was so alien, so difficult. And I feel so good because I faced that challenge. I knew what it felt like to have absolutely no idea that I could do this, and I did it. Next to the last thing in course design is to think about where you teach, the context, the classroom, the culture, the community. If you're teaching in a classroom like this versus a laboratory setting or a room with movable seats, should impact how you design your class. And the very last stage is to develop a syllabus. And hopefully in your handout, somewhere, you have a checklist for what should go into a syllabus. Can you look and see if you find it before you close up shop and get ready to leave? Yes. It's a checklist for a comprehensive course syllabus. I would suggest as you put this together, again, the abstract, the capstone part of the design of your course, is to put it all together in a flowing syllabus. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. You've been one of the best audiences